And welcome to Soul Zero Two. This is the podcast that's putting the oxygen back into the Christian life one soul at a time. That's our goal, at least. We want to encourage you. We want to give you hope in Christ. We want to show you that there's a better way, and that way is God, and He is faithful, and He never fails. We've been talking about the meaning of confinement, and in particular, the last time we talked about six ways you know that you are maybe in a season of confinement, and we said things like you're claustrophobic. I don't just mean physically, I mean spiritually and mentally and emotionally and socially. And you are suffering from a disconnected from people, but also disconnected from yourself. You're alienated. We also said that maybe you feel like every day feels like yesterday, Groundhog Day. Then we also said restlessness, an overwhelming sense of restlessness that maybe can lead you to spend money online or do projects you would never do. Depression was a big one too, but also you feel powerless to change it. But I want to tell you today that you are not powerless to change anything, especially with God as a big part of your life. And but just before we continue, I want to just share our YouTube channel that we have. That go through our website, soul02.com, and you'll find our YouTube channel. And we are recording these now, not only audio-wise, but video-wise. And if this has been a blessing to you, we'd ask that you subscribe, because we want to build up that channel and really be a blessing to many other people who might just be blessed by this. So today, I want to just share with you about, again, the solution. So what do you do with confinement? How do we navigate the season of confinement? What do you do when you feel like, even though I left the house, even though I drove an hour away from the house, I still feel confined. I still feel alienated from myself. I still feel like I'm struggling with, what is this? I miss the old me. What do I do? So the first one is this. The first thing you can do is this: create purpose in your season of confinement. That is totally, absolutely important. And research has been done everywhere that, when people are, if you read that articles or any books on what happened to the 33 miners in South America, I forgot where, it might have been Guatemala, who were stuck underground for a long time. One of the things they said is that they created purpose, because without purpose, they would kind of lose their minds. And I think of Joseph in the Bible. We mentioned this last time, that Joseph, he was imprisoned for something he didn't do. He was accused of rape when he was a man of integrity. And it is said that the captain put Joseph in charge of the inmates, and Joseph took care of them. Why would that happen? Because Joseph was navigating his season in such a way that he became promoted, that he was promoted in his season. Imagine that good can come out of confinement, that good can come out of the season where you feel like you're stuck. And he was so faithful, and he was so diligent and with so much integrity, that the jailer trusted him with the inmates and said, "Hey, take care of them. I trust you." And this is what I mean by creating purpose in that prison we feel, even if it's not a physical prison. But it's saying, I'm not going to live every day trying to focus on these walls I can't see or hear or touch. I'm not going to focus on these things, because, again, confinement can be spiritual, it can be psychological, it can be something that's non-physical. And we have to decide if we're going to focus on that invisible prison every day, or if we're going to create a purpose in it. And that's what Joseph did. Paul did the same thing in the Bible. That's why I admire these men. Paul was sent to prison for 2 years. And from there, he wrote 4 epistles, which is a big deal, because that's a good chunk of the New Testament. And these were very good epistles, very heavy-duty epistles, like Ephesians and Philippians and Colossians and Philemon. And he did this because he did not wait, and he was not going to wait until he was free from prison to be excellent and to be great and to do great things. He was going to do it right from his place of confinement. And that's what he did. He did more damage to the kingdom of darkness by writing these letters from the place of confinement than if he were out of prison. And sometimes when we get shut down, so to speak, we shut down. And that is the opposite of what God wants in us. He says, now is the time to use your gift. Now is the time for you to write that book you've been needing to write. Now is the time for you to start that business or to get your online degree. Now is the time, because if you wait until you leave that prison, it'll never happen. Do it while you're in your season of confinement, and then you watch how something wonderful happens through it. So Paul didn't see himself as a prisoner of circumstances. In fact, he called himself a prisoner of God. Ephesians 3:1, he says, this is the reason that I, Paul, am a prisoner for Christ, for the sake of you. What a vision. Think about it. To say, I'm here, I'm in prison for your sake, not for my sake, not because I did something wrong, but I'm here because while I'm here, I will do more good to you than if I weren't here. And that's what I'm challenging some of you to do today. See God in your prison. See God in your confinement. See God in that place of alienation where you don't even know yourself anymore. And know that he can work right there and reinvent you, and he can do something incredible in your life. So Joseph turned his confinement from a prison into a palace. And so did Paul. Paul did the same thing. And Paul even had a great relationship with his jailers. They trusted him. They respected him. Now, you've heard of John Bunyan. It is said that for 12 long years, his lips were silenced in Bedford jail. And that was where he did his greatest and best work in his life. It wasn't out of prison. He did his most phenomenal work from the place of confinement. There he wrote the book called The Pilgrim's Progress. He said, I was at home in prison, and I sat me down and wrote, for joy did make me write. I want to challenge you today. Find joy in that place of confinement. Find joy in that place of limitation, in that place where you feel like you are exiled, and you'll find your gift. You'll find your way to get out of that pit that you feel like you're in. You've heard of the Birdman from Alcatraz, that while in prison, he found a nest of canaries. And in a few years, he became a bird expert without having gone to college. And he published a book that was actually noted and respected by some bird experts. This is unbelievable when you think about it. Where did he do it from? He did it from his place of confinement, from his place of exile. So that's number one. Number one is create purpose in your limitation, create purpose in your confinement. But here's number two. Make a plan to manage your thoughts and emotions during your confinement. When I say confinement, I don't mean just physical. I mean a season. We all go through a season where we feel like the walls are closing in on us. Make a plan. What do I mean by that? Have you noticed that if you don't have a plan for your thoughts will have a plan for you. And any thought, any stray thought, any hopeless, any depressing, any dark thought will engage your mind and bring you down. So you have to have a plan of what your thought life is going to be like, what your emotions are going to be like, and not let them get out of control. Because if you do that, you're opening a door. Every time I get a hopeless thought, here's what I do. I challenge it in light of what God says in the scriptures, what God says about reality, what God says about me, what God says about the world. Because my mind, when I'm alone, can be my worst enemy. So whenever I get a dark emotion, I don't take it seriously. I know it's going to pass. I don't give it much credence. I know it's going to pass. So this is what I mean by having a plan. By what happens if you get that thought? What are you going to do? Have a plan for that. But here's number three. Move your body as best you can. This is the physical part that we all need. And this is something I have to admit to you, I need to work on more. Sometimes I get into the habit and then I get out of it because I get really, really busy. And by the time, night rolls around, it's 9:30 and I'm tired. The last thing I want to do is work out. So, but exercise creates endorphins. We know that, right? That's an established fact. And it decreases anxiety and it lifts you up emotionally. Have you noticed that whenever you work out, you just feel better in a sense? You just feel better inside. You feel like, hey, I'm doing something for myself. You need that. Move your body, take a walk, take a run, get a treadmill, get a rowing machine. Do what you have to do to move. Get your neighbor to take a walk with you. Here's number 4, reach out to someone. This is important in a season of disconnection. And I know I've been saying last time that even if you're among 1,000 people, you can still feel disconnected. However, there are people in our life that we can still connect with, that even in that state of disconnection, they can reach us, they can help us. Find someone that you trust, that you can be with and hang out with, and that will keep you from falling on your face, falling into a rut. They'll help you to reset your perspective. They'll challenge your crazy thoughts and say, no, you can't believe that. We all meet someone in our life that calls us on the carpet in a good way, not just in a bad way, but that challenges us in a good way and saying, you can do better. I believe in you. Here's number 5. Discover God in the mundane. Discover God in the mundane. We kind of covered that with the Birdman of Alcatraz, with what Paul did and Joseph did. But it seems like the whole world has become quieted and stilled in a way. But at the same time, the whole world is still raging, isn't it? There's all these protests happening and people are angry, and the word rage and outrage is just such a common word now. And it is when everything stops that we need to listen to God's voice. And sometimes we need to just shut things down. Just shut off social media, turn off the TV, turn off any kind of electronic device. And I'm an electronic freak. I have all kinds of technology, and I have I speak to my products here, and they answer back and they read me the news. But sometimes you have to shut it down, because in the silence is when God speaks. And yes, he speaks sometimes in the noise, but more than often he speaks when I quiet myself down. And Jeremiah in chapter 39:15, it is said of him that the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah while he was confined in the court of the guard. And he was quiet. He was in a place where no one was talking to him. And that's where God's word came to him. And we must learn that principle in our life, to quiet our hearts. Sometimes I take a break from the news for days on end, because it's exhausting to just put so much energy into all of the anger and outrage and all the things that are happening. And we need time to stop for ourselves, to reset, to renew, and to replenish ourselves. So Frederick Buechner said this beautifully. He said, there is no event so commonplace, but that God is present within it. Always hittingly, always leaving you room to recognize him or not to recognize him. But all the more fascinatingly, because of that, all the more compellingly and hauntingly. And he goes on to say, because in the last analysis, all moments are key moments, and life itself is grace. How do you get that? You get that by being quiet and by being still. You can't get that in an angry, loud environment of competing messages and of wolves tearing each other apart. You can't get it. You have to be quiet. And even those of us who are loud by nature and boisterous and outgoing need to learn to be quiet, to listen and hear. Here's number 6. What do you do in seasons of confinement? Understand that confinement can be a powerful thing. When you know that this is not the worst thing in the world, you're halfway there already. When you realize that what you thought was the worst case scenario can actually be a blessing from God, that's when you are halfway through it. And I say that from experience, and I say that having spoken with people who have even lost loved ones in this season. They say, you know what? God brought the family together in a way he never did before. And people were reconciled, and they were loving on each other. And yes, we miss our loved one, but you know what? Good came out of it, because God, he doesn't cause that, but he brings good out of the difficult situations in our life, things that happen that are awful. So do you see your confinement as a powerful thing, a tool that God can use to grow you and to make you achieve the destiny he has for you? This is why serving is the most powerful way to create purpose in this season. When you serve somebody, when you bless somebody, when you help somebody, it's a way to turn confinement into a powerful thing. And I think of one of my favorite stories of all time, and I read this on the audio version of it now, and I'm going to read it again in the video version of this podcast. But Father Kolbe was a famous priest, and he didn't just lay down and die, but he created purpose at the very end of his life. And here's the story of Father Kolbe. Father Kolbe was a 45-year-old Franciscan monk with kind eyes, and he lived in a monastery with 700 priests. And as Poland fell, Father Kolbe urged all the priests to leave. He said, "You guys need to leave." So they left. And he remained with some of the refugees. And a year later, he was arrested and placed in the infamous concentration camp, Auschwitz. Every prisoner suffered from exhaustion and starvation from this place called a starvation bunker. And Father Kolbe, in that season of confinement, chose to serve them. Every night before he went to bed, he checked on everyone. He bound up their feet. He healed their wounds. He prayed with them. He spoke with them. He listened to their pain. The camp doctor later said, "I never saw such an example of love." One warm July evening, silence was shattered by an alarm, and a prisoner escaped by the morning and had not been found. And this meant that the guards were going to take it out on the prisoners. So they took 14 prisoners and they made them stand all day in the hot sun. Some fainted from heat and collapsed, and some died. The sun grew, and then it began to sink into the horizon. And the commander came forward and said, 10 of you will die in the starvation bunker." And the prisoners got really nervous because they preferred a bullet to the head to the starvation bunker. It was not just starvation, but it was your tongue and your brain would swell with heat, and your insides would shrivel up, and you would die of malnutrition and of dryness. Your lungs would dry up. And as the officer picked 10 men, Father Kolbe was not one of them. So he interrupted the officer and said, I want to be one of those men. Choose me. I want to die in place of one of the men you picked. And the man Kolbe picked thanked him with his eyes when he told this story years later. A minute later, Father Kolbe walked to the starvation bunker with 9 others. And as the days passed on, they began these long days of swelling and dryness. To survive, they would lick the moisture from the walls, and they would have to do things that you can't mention, really. Outside the starvation bunker, they would normally hear cries for mercy and anguish, but instead, they heard singing. Father Kolbe was bringing them home one by one. And that story, that great story, is told by The Revolutionary Communicator, a book by Jed Lokenstone and Eric Medenfind. And that story just shows just how powerful confinement can be if you see it in a way that you serve. So what do I want to do with my season of confinement? Do I really want to make a difference? Or do I really want, do I want to complain about it? Or do I want to, what do I want to do about it? So again, I want to ask you to make sure you subscribe to our channel and be part of Soul 02. It'd be a blessing. If this has been a blessing to you, check out our website. Our website is soul02.com. And there we have a YouTube channel, we have podcasts, and we have videos and audios. So until next time, it's been great being with you. Thanks, and God bless you.